This is Driving Green, a podcast on green technology and supply chains. This is episode number 2, recorded February 21st, 2020. This week's guest was Menka Sethi, Chief Operating Officer of American Battery Technology Company. We explore her early career as an architect and developer, as well as her director role at Facebook. We then get an education on permitting, and she gives us a status update of their construction project on their commercial pilot facility in Fernley, Nevada. Ronald, myself, and Kevin are long-term investors and advisors in ABTC, so this is not financial advice. Please do all of your own due diligence. And without further ado, please enjoy. And I'm going to look at the camera, speak clearly. I'm not going to have my daughter's hair scrunchie in my hand this time.
I like when the dog makes a cameo appearance, though.
Yeah, he's upstairs this time. Because if he hears a siren or anything, he'll just start howling. And my wife bought me not one, not two, but three,
Are you that ADD, bro?
4 fidget things.
How do you even do that? Can you even do that? Balance that many?
No, not all at the same time.
Hey, we got Menka on the line.
Hey guys, good morning.
Good morning, welcome.
Thank you.
Now Menka sees how OCD you are.
Yeah, she saw all my fidget spinners and yeah.
Welcome, Menka. Glad to have you on the show. Really excited for the chat today.
Thank you, Ronald. I'm really happy to be here, and Kyle and Kevin as well.
Awesome. You know, one thing that's before we getting to the really nerdy permit conversations, which I look forward to, by the way. What's interesting about your profile that people don't really notice unless they like really LinkedIn stalked you is that you actually have a background in architecture, and that's really compelling. I'd love to just start off this conversation today just by learning a little bit more about that. Does any of that really apply when making like a plant, a recycling plant or anything? Just learning a little bit more about that background and seeing how much of that you can carry forward into your current role.
It's a great question. Yes, I'm a licensed architect. We have friendly conversations on our design build team for our pilot plant. Is the architect more valuable or is the engineer more valuable? It's a yes and in my view. The engineers might disagree. But yeah, it's very applicable. I've spent the last 2 decades in real estate development, and architecture has been at the foundation of that. And also my background, I have an MBA, so the focus on real estate finance, and I used to teach real estate finance at university as well. So the experience of having permitted different types of properties, whether it's commercial, government, residential, mixed use, or even right zoning codes, has been instrumental in helping us get to yes on our pilot factory approvals. Because whether or not you are permitting through, every city permit process is different, because that's what local government by definition is. They have local authority. States have different codes and regulations that you have to follow, but at the end of the day, it's the training of having to collaborate with local community and to comply with very important safety regulations and codes that has been at the front and center of a lot of what I do in piloting or permitting our pilot plant at American Battery. The other piece of my background that I think is relevant, I joined American Battery because it has a clear ESG focus. On one hand, yes, I believe in the business plan. On the other hand, I believe it's a moral imperative that we transition to a clean energy economy and that we do it in a way that addresses our most pressing social issues. And I spent a lot of my focus at Facebook using the success of that business to drive social impact investments like the $1 billion investment in affordable housing and transportation. So it's that skill set to build trust alongside community, build trust alongside regulators, to put in place programs, investments, a business plan that works not only for the business, the company, but also for the local community that I think is really relevant. And then the other key part of my background, I think that gets overlooked a lot because it's corporate wonk talk, is scaling a company. I spent 4 years, working on the location strategy, driving the global growth strategy at Facebook. And that's really important when you're early on at a startup because you're building the foundation, for years to come. And what does that look like? Thinking proactively, thinking strategically, as opposed to just shooting from the hip, fighting crisis from crisis.
Yeah.
So to that point, maybe can you give me some insight as to what your job role is, which obviously at a startup doesn't mean a whole lot because you're wearing a lot of hats, but can you kind of give me an idea of like what your current role is, in practice, as well as long term, what you're responsible for?
I spend a lot of my time, so I'm the chief operating officer, but I spend a lot of my time getting the pilot plant permitted and operational. So that's the bulk of my focus, because that's the bulk of our business plan right now. I spend a lot of my time focusing on policy work. It's an extremely exciting time right now in the policy world, because I think the US has woken up and realized we have to meaningfully address climate change, and EVs, clean energy is at the forefront of that, and the need for battery metals is even at the more forefront of that, even though that goes lost, I think, in a lot of conversation. You can't have EVs without the battery metals to produce them. So the political climate, especially with the new administration, is extremely exciting. There's also an awareness that the US is pretty far behind from a policy perspective on end-of-life planning, on transitioning to clean energy, especially in comparison to the EU, to China, and to Canada, Australia. So I think there's this emphasis to catch up so that we can compete. And not a lot of our competitors are taking a thought leadership position in that space. And we're really privileged. I'm really privileged to be at a company where we don't have to be promotional or talk a lot of fluffy things about our technology. It's inherently green, and it's profitable because it's fast. So we kind of get to hide in the truth and be thought leaders on the policy front. So I spent a lot of time there, and I spent a lot of time on our communications efforts because we're not a global recognized name, and it's to build credibility. You kind of have to be a little more proactive in talking about what we do, and we're trying to leverage social media a lot on that front because media itself is going through a transition. So I spend a lot of time there as well. And then the other hat I wear is really, how are we going to grow? What is our hiring going to look like? What does our organizational structure look like? What are the type of policies we have to start thinking about now? Putting in place the right IT technology framework, putting in place hiring plans, like super basic, because we're in very early days. So that's the bulk of what I do. And then looking ahead, the last part of your question, what does my role look like? I think increasingly I'll have a lot less hands-on work with the permitting and the policy work. I do a lot of that directly right now, but over time, we'll be building teams and we'll be growing locations. So I think there'll be a transition more focused on strategy than on implementation for me personally. Whereas right now I focus a lot on the implementation. Does that make sense?
Yeah. You brought up some really interesting threads in that response right now with, looking at a lot of the policy side, the permitting side. Clearly, those are important focus points right now. And when, thinking about that, I saw your background at Facebook, right, in director of location strategy. Actually, when the first announcement of you being COO for this company, I looked you up. I saw that YouTube video on you talking about that at Facebook, right? So you have some interesting things. So for those maybe who haven't seen that video or just additional context, is there anything that you really took from your time in Facebook? Any past experiences or stories when it comes to maybe difficulties in permitting or difficulties in having locations and some of those challenges, and maybe some of those things, experiences or strategies or approaches that you can bring over right now into the current crop of challenges that comes with building the pilot factory?
Absolutely. The YouTube video you're talking about is on our $1 billion housing investment that I led at Facebook. Is that the one?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the $1 billion investment at Facebook grew out of the company's intent to expand its campus and an awareness of what job growth does to a region that has fairly limited infrastructure and the impacts of that. And then how could the company become a partner to community in addressing those those tension points. And I think fast forward to American Battery Technology Company, there's a direct link, a direct lesson learned. Whereas in my previous work, one of the tension points was lack of housing was contributing to lack of social mobility. Something I really take to heart, the ability to come here to the United States with not much and build yourself a successful path that you can then pass on to your future generations. And that, that story is really becoming more difficult with the divide, I hate to say that, between haves and have-nots is kind of the new narrative, which is not what it should be. And housing played a key role in that. So in my previous work, hence we decided to focus on housing, being a contributor to the solutions. I think at American Battery, there's a direct parallel because we're scaling a new industry that a lot of people don't know much about it. So it's imperative on us at ABTC to build the trust with local community that the process we're bringing is inherently safe. It's inherently good for the environment because we're stemming the tide of batteries going to landfill. We're reducing in the long run the amount of material that needs to be pulled directly from the earth. And we're doing all of this in a way that has an extremely light environmental footprint, very few air emissions, either particulate, greenhouse gas, very low water use, recycle, retreat, reuse, and powering through renewables like on-site solar. And doing all of this in a way where it's profitable enough, we can commit to things like a living wage. So we will pay more than minimum wage. We'll be able to pay a living wage. So all of this helps us build the trust with the community, because at the end of the day, if a community doesn't want you there, it makes it very challenging to grow your business there. And right now, because the industry is new, it's on us, and we're thought leaders in this space, to build the trust, explain the industry, explain why it's beneficial, explain the need. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that kind of goes into my next question, which I was just going to say is, obviously that the answer might be different for short term versus long term, but with lithium ion battery recycling, what do you see as, I guess, the short term and conversely long term challenges? I mean, short term, obviously you're talking permitting, you're talking about trying to convince people that it's safe, demonstrate that it's safe before you have a facility, but long term, what do you think your challenges are?
I think the key challenges are speed and nimbleness of innovation. Right now, and again, this goes back to the policy context, the set of regulations that governs our industry is 40 years old. It's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act through the EPA, and it didn't even conceive of our industry. So it's kind of, square or round peg and square hole type of scenario. And having to go through these legacy processes for a industry that, lithium batteries have a different safety profile from, say, lead acid batteries. And there are processes to recycle that some are greener. That's a generic term, but it's common speak, so I'll use it, greener than others. And none of this nuance has really been baked into the law. So right now we're trying to scale the industry fast, but we're having to slowly go through this legacy clunky regulatory framework. So that is both a short-term tension point, but it will increasingly be a long-term tension point as well that will, if we don't conquer it, not enable our country and our companies to compete globally, because like I mentioned before, the EU, China are very far ahead of us. And so we kind of have to play catch up. So it's both a short-term and a long-term tension point, but it is the nimbleness, the ability to scale. And that goes back to the regulatory framework. The other, that also underpins one of the other constraints I see, which is we have to figure out how to more seamlessly store and transport lithium batteries. And until we do that, I think there's risk that more batteries will continue to end up in landfills than be recycled. And the reason why it's the logistics behind in our industry are really tough, again, goes back to the RCRA hazardous waste framework. that our industry is operating in the United States, and the ways that states can have their own twist, the ability to put their own twist on how to handle the battery feedstock. So for example, if our pilot plant is in Nevada, if our feedstock comes from state A or state B, it could be the exact same feedstock, have a different waste designation, and we would have to figure out if we could even touch that battery feedstock in Nevada. So there's some clarification that needs to take place to even get the batteries to the pilot plant. And then storage, it's the same. And how and where can you store the battery feedstock until it can be recycled? And the regulatory framework underpinning both the storage and the transportation is, again, the RCRA law, Resource Conservation Recovery Act. And there's two different classifications. There's universal waste and there's hazardous waste. And there's two different ways you have to, two different sets of regulations that apply to each. And if you look at the battery feedstock that we'll be recycling, we have three different types. One, which would be batteries that still have lithium batteries with their casings still intact. That's actually considered universal waste under RCRA law or RCRA regulations. And then there's battery feedstock where the casings are damaged. According to RCRA, that would be hazardous waste. And then the third type of feedstock is, I'd call it partially manufactured. So components of a battery that maybe didn't pass QC and ended up not ever being placed into service or just stop being manufactured altogether for whatever reason. That's considered hazardous waste. So there's a trickiness, right? And how to figure out to sort the different battery types, the feedstock types, and then going through this bifurcated regulation process. And then there's this broader kind of existential question: should our industry be considered waste? Have we taken what would previously, or under the current regulations, be considered waste, hazardous or universal, and we've essentially turned it into a commodity? If you start to look at some of the new policy proposals in, say, the EU, where they're repealing their old battery directive from 2006, they're going through new options now, and they're starting to think about this as well. Maybe it should be an entirely new set of regulations. So if we could, if we could conquer the storage and transportation or clarify it, I think that would help us in both the short term and then the long term. And then the last piece I'll say, which is maybe longer term, I think we have to decide, our industry has to decisively show that new batteries, lithium batteries made from recycled materials equally or outperform, and I'm going to bet on outperform, batteries made from new materials.
Awesome.
Wow. So Menka, I mean, with everything you shared, I think this is a great time to jump in more detail on the short-term stuff, especially about the permitting. So can you give us sort of an idea of, what kind of permits do you need to get something like the pilot facility in Fernley, Nevada up and running?
Thank you so much for asking this question, because it's a wonky answer that no one really wants to hear, but it is the reason why you can't just build this overnight. There are two key layers of permits that one would need that we're getting for our pilot plant. Permits at the local level, and then permits at the state level. And the state level permits are generally relate to the environmental regulations, and they're actually based on federal regulations set by the EPA and the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, that the federal government delegates administration authority to the state. And in our case, it's the Nevada Department of Environmental Protection. And then the local permits from City of Fernley, in our case, really relate to, does the pilot plant use that we're proposing comply with all the really rich community plans that have been adopted, the zoning codes, the city's comprehensive master plan, which really represent the city's own vision for itself. So that's the permit application that we filed last week with the City of Fernley, and it's kind of the broad umbrella permit that will it'll probably take between, at my best guess at this point, 4 or 5 months to get through that process, and that's the planning permit. Yes, you comply with our vision, the city's vision for itself in terms of use, industrial use in that location. with all the different parking requirements and the building heights and the signage requirements, the landscaping requirements. It's the broad planning approval. So that's number one. While that goes through, and after that goes through, we can then, the city basically blesses us and says, yes, you comply with our vision. Now give us your detailed construction drawings, and so we'll need building permits, and we might phase those for a site permit, which would allow us to put the plans for grading and foundations in place before we fully design the shell of the building or the insides of it, so that we can stagger the construction start as fast as possible. And that would kick off the building permits. The next permit from buildings would probably be the shell. What does the shell of the building look like? The roof, the walls, the massing. And then the third building permit would be the insides. We call it tenant improvements. And that will be, how is the equipment laid out? Do you have all the fire protections in place? Are all the uses, categorized in compliance with fire protection codes and building codes? And then while all of this is going on, these permits are, in process at the city level. We are processing our environmental approvals through the state of Nevada. And there's two key approvals we need. One is an air permit. And the air permit basically shows that the equipment, the technical process we are proposing does not harm human or environmental safety, and that we have emissions that are acceptable and not hazardous. So this is something for us we're really excited about because our process is very clean and not concerned. But again, it's a time process. This could take 6 to 9 months to get this permit. And the third permit we'll need is called a written determination. And this is to be able to process and handle hazardous waste. So we can operate the pilot plant, and that's a longer term permit, 9 to 12 months. We will be able to operate the pilot plant before getting the written determination if we only agree to recycle what would be considered universal waste. So back to my previous comment, what does that mean for a lithium battery recycling plant? That means that we can only recycle batteries that still have their casings fully intact. Once we get the written determination, we'll also be able to process the other battery feedstock, partially manufactured, and casings that are slightly damaged. And the purpose of the written determination, it's extremely comprehensive. You have to talk about what your technical process is. You identify the different types of equipment, all the inputs and the outputs from each stage of the process. What are the safety protocols you have in place? What partnerships do you have with local fire and safety agencies? So if there's an unfortunate event or safety event at the pilot plant, that the local authorities will know what to do. What are the operating protocols internally? It's soup to nuts, extremely comprehensive, and for good reason. Want to make sure that any industrial process that operates is safe, inherently safe. So those are the two key levels, city and state level, that we're going through. And it's
is there any kind of water permitting process? Because given the way your technology runs, I know it's not heavy on air, but how about for water?
We are not going to be subject to any type of discharge permit because we don't have any hazardous or chemical discharge. We have a process, and it's part of our technology process, where again, anything, any chemical that would be released in a water format will be recaptured, treated, and then reused. In fact, even through our chemical process, and where we, the first part of our process, we demanufacture the battery into what is called black mass. And that's mechanical shredding, water-based process. And then we have a back-end process that's chemical, where we then extract the individual components from that black mass and refine the individual components, namely nickel, cobalt, lithium, manganese, to battery grade metals. Even in that chemical process, the reagents that we use, we capture them, we reconfigure them, and we reuse them. So there isn't really any discharge. There isn't. Otherwise, we would need, some sort of permit.
Oh, great. That's very helpful.
So when it comes to all this, right? I'd just love to step back a little bit, especially for some of the people watching this right now and saying, what makes permits so hard and long to file and complete? Are there dependencies and like orders of operations, like all the permits you laid out, like, can some of them be done concurrently? Are some of them really waiting on others to be done? And that's part of another permit that you file once you have this initial permit done. Are there, some permits that, are approved but conditionally and can be revoked at a certain point later? Like what are some of those difficulties and challenges that you face?
Yeah, there certainly is an ordering, and it's a little bit like piecing together the puzzles. So if you just think about it at the broadest level, so the first permit that we've submitted for at the city of Fernley, it's the planning level approval that basically endorses the use and the exterior form of our pilot plant. And once the city has said yes to that, then you can get your building permits. So there's an ordering there. And there are times when you can apply for building permits in advance of getting your planning permit, which is fine, but that there's some risk there as well. From it's nice to have everything buttoned up 100% certain. Yes, you comply with our vision for ourselves, our planning permit, and then you can go with all certainty, buttoned up, and then go apply for building permits. That there's flexibility there on overlapping those two processes, and it's kind of like a risk calculation. And in the back.
Oh, sorry. Are there certain permits that like are harder than others, where it's like, if this permit gets done, this is worth a PR release, or this permit, this is like a stat, like 95% of people approve it. It just takes 3 months to do it or whatever, right? Or is it just like, we're just going to wait until like we see construction on the ground? That's when we know that, okay, the permitting is fine. Like for like the people who are just peripherally understanding from the outside, a little bit of visibility would be helpful to us and understand a little bit more.
Like, I think it's going to be most rewarding from an external perspective when tractors are digging in dirt, right? That's what everyone wants to see. And the grading permit is probably one of the easier permits to get, because, like for the planning permit, you have to go through a really comprehensive process of showing that everything that we have proposed complies with the community's vision for use, for landscaping, for physical form, for trail networks, for local parks, like all of the above. It's actually extremely comprehensive. And then the hardest permits in my mind are the environmental permits, because the regulations are so deep and broad, as they should be, right? Protect human health and safety. But those are the very not glamorous permits that no one wants to talk about. And they're extremely technical, and they're very hard to understand and hard to communicate. So they're the ones I'm most proud of, and I'm most proud of what we're doing, because we're doing it in partnership with the regulators, and we've built trust. Not every business takes that approach. You can also forge ahead without the trust of the regulators and try and push the envelope in the system without that partnership in place, and that's inherently antithetical to ABTC's ethos. We would never do that. So again, I think to your point, everyone wants to see shovels in the ground. That's a pretty easy permit to get, but there's an ordering. You can't get it until you have the blessing that you comply with the city's vision for itself. And at the very back end, you can't turn the lights on to the factory unless you have your environmental approvals. So all the exciting stuff externally, like walls going up, equipment going in, all of that will be far more exciting, I think. But for me personally, I'm most excited when I have my environmental permits in hand. That's like a job well done.
No, Menka, that's great to hear. So essentially, there it is. You guys won't be taking something like the Uber route, right? Where Uber just started their services without really any regulatory approvals and pushed the boundaries. That's not something you guys are looking to do either.
That's the exact opposite of what we are doing. In fact, we published, our CEO published an op-ed back in December. And again, this goes back to, what does the market find exciting? Shovels and dirt. I was really excited about the op-ed that I think it got some visibility, but it was more about like, how do we run the business? And it gets to exactly at what you're talking about. We run the business by addressing society's largest issues and being a good member of the community and contributing back as a business. And so back to the permitting process, yeah, we're going to do this in partnership. We want to be thought partners to the regulators because we know the environmental regulators are facing also an existential crisis because they don't want batteries going to the landfill either. But they have a set of regulations that, again, are 40 years old that they are responsible for administering. So there is this tension point there too. And there's an opportunity for us to be partners as opposed to, trying to forge ahead workarounds. And I believe, and my experience tells me, that if you partner with the environmental regulators, that you actually move ahead faster in the long run. And that's what we're trying to do here by setting precedent for how our industry should be viewed. And dare I say, how RCRA might be polished to better allow innovation and nimble scaling while protecting the environment so that we can, stay competitive globally. I think we're certainly working on those conversations, but you can't even have those conversations if you were to take the approach of just working the system without partnership.
Well, and so that kind of leads me to the question in my mind, which is, you were talking about kind of the long-term advantages here of forging these partnerships so that when it comes time to go back to the table to say, all right, we've got another facility, we have another thing we need to work with you on, you at least have that going. So, obviously it's probably difficult to even think about your next construction project or your it might not even be worth talking about. But do you see these partnerships giving you a competitive advantage? Whereas if somebody forges ahead and just kind of says, well, we'll see how far we can push the envelope without the state or regulators, coming in on us. Do you see that as having an advantage going forward when you go to build your commercial facility, or, maybe the strategy in picking where you put that particular facility?
Absolutely. Our building trust as a contributing member of community, whether it's local or it's state, whether it's the environmental regulation policy making community, or whether it's the local jobs community or the local education, whatever you define community as, it is absolutely a competitive advantage to be considering a new location where they can call your old set of partners and say, hey, how'd they do? If you get a ringing endorsement that you do what you say you're going to do, that you comply and that you partner, I can't quantify or even express enough how much of an advantage that is. Because it just takes one event of non-trust to make it really difficult ahead. And I am optimistic through permitting this pilot plant that it will surface the tension points in the current regulatory framework that apply. Again, it's the environmental regulations are based on federal law, EPA and RCRA, Resource Conservation Recovery Act. So I think by scaling it in Nevada, where they have, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most inspirational climate strategies that just came out with in December, that is comprehensive. It doesn't just talk about EVs, it talks about the supply chain, and it ties it to climate change and equity. So I think within that context, within this state, with our pilot project, there is an opportunity to identify the tension points and solutions for federal law. So whether our future location is in Nevada or if it's in a different state, there will be this advantage that we were at the core and at the thought, the seed thought for what might be ahead for permitting processes.
And then in addition to this, are these permitting processes and everything you're doing now going to help in terms of the expansion of the business? I know you guys just got a grant for the mining operations and other extractions. Will this help that portion of the business out as well?
Yes, absolutely. It's the same permitting process that applies to our pilot recycling plant that would apply to any type of extraction partnerships as well. So it's the same set of regulations that we're dealing with. So yes, it is. I think there's two different, you get into this again, you get into the questioning of what is it that you're handling? Is it in fact waste? Is it hazardous or is it not? So I think that's a different set of questions and answers in the mining perspective than in recycling. But and the one thing that is interesting in the pilot plant, we have our extraction, we'll have our labs, our processing labs and the analytical labs that help us develop the extraction technologies that we got the grant for. It's those same extraction technologies that we're applying to recycling as well. Is, I guess, the best way to explain it. The grant that we won was for our extraction technologies in partnership with, clay deposit, American Lithium and their clay deposits in the Tonopah area in Nevada. In that case, we'd be applying our extraction technologies to claystone deposits. In the pilot plant case, recycling, we're applying our extraction technologies to old lithium batteries. Does that make sense? There's just the feedstock that's different. It could be claystone or it could be batteries. It's indifferent, but the commonality is that extraction process. So what we're proving through the environmental permits in the pilot plant is that the extraction processes themselves are not inherently hazardous, that they are safe. So we can take that and scale it, whether it's recycling batteries or whether it's being applied in permanent form or mobile form or whatever might come to new materials coming out of the ground.
So essentially what I'm saying, coming back to permits, is if you get the permitting right for extraction technology, you can pretty much scale it across the board.
Yes. And obviously there are nuances. It's not exactly the same to apply our process to a battery versus a claystone, but at the core, there's this synergy there based on the same concept. And you're exactly right. As we're going through the permitting, the biggest permit we're going to have to go through, or the two biggest permits, are the air permit, and it's called the written determination, and it's a review of our technology process. So you're exactly right, because our technology process is the same extraction technology that we were just funded for from DOE that we're applying to batteries that are being recycled. Yes.
So those two permits that you just said that are super important, are those 2021 things? Are those 2022 things? Is that like too much fluidity and dependency on previous permits to even give like a year or a quarter timeline to that right now? Well, what does that look like on your mind? I'm asking because I know everyone.
I get asked all the time. The air permit will be 2021, and the written determination. My best guess at this point is that it will be early 2022, and the reason I say that is we don't need the written determination to start the pilot plant because we're committing to only recycle, remember, the universal waste batteries that have casings intact. So we have built in that flexibility. But yeah, we need the air permit. It will be in place this year if we're to, start the factory. So 2021. The other part I will say in applying for the permits that's a little tricky is because you have to, there's this other tension point that we're working through as well. And that is the information you have to provide to gain the confidence of the regulators, and rightfully so, that what we're proposing is safe and able to be permitted. It's a lot of technology process information where confidentiality is really key to keeping our competitive advantage. And it's not just us that goes through this, it's all of our competitors going through this as well. So those are the conversations we're going through right now. We have a formal confidentiality request in place with NDEP that I expect to receive yes on very shortly, and then we can move ahead in submitting for the air permit.
So a lot of this is, so there are heavy trade secrets that could become available if certain processes aren't followed. And certain things
they won't become available because we have good partners in Nevada who are working through that process with us. But it just takes time to hash out what is acceptable to us and what is acceptable to the state and come to agreement on that. And there haven't been any issues. It's just there's a process you have to go through to get that in place, and that's what we're doing right now.
Gotcha. I'm going to go back to the extraction and the air permit because just talking to you has helped me, and I'm pretty sure Kyle and Ronald as well, realize how powerful those permits are. If you get it in the state of Nevada, is it safe to say it's going to be significantly easier? We might have covered this point, but significantly easier just to move, let's say, to New York or other states? right? Getting those same permits and being able to run the same
It
processes?
won't, no, I wouldn't off the bat say it will be easier because again, the reason why I won't say that is I want to respect the independence of each state permitting body, that each has their own prerogative. So off the bat, will it be easier? No. Practically, will it be easier? That is the goal, absolutely, because we've proven here that it can be done, what the process is, and to show that we have partnered with those who are permitting us, I think, again, we will be able to walk in the door with trust. And we will be able to figure out how to navigate the wonky RCRA permitting process that when, again, round peg, square hole for us, and we'll be able to do that faster, but it's based on the trust. But in terms of like tactical, do we have to go through less paperwork because we did it in Nevada? No, we still have to go through the rigorous process unless RCRA is polished a bit at the federal level. And those are discussions I think that are starting to happen.
I think overall, fundamentally, the most pressing question, and this might be pushing too much, but when do you think construction, this permit stuff will finish and construction will begin?
I think you'll see shovels in the ground and tractors in late April, early May.
But yeah, no, I went on Fernley's website to read through the compliance and their permitting checklist. I literally read every document.
Welcome to my world.
Well, I mean, I figured if I wanted to be able to push you, I have to know what the important ones were.
We looked at our last viewership and saw a lot of the people that were watching are American battery investors, people are enthusiasts in the community. They want to know what's happening. And of course, as you said at the beginning of the show, not putting out fluffy remarks generally means that, you're letting the process play out. You're working through the steps. But what would you like to say to that community, if you could say anything directly to them?
Just have the confidence. We get a lot of questions on when are you going to break ground? Why aren't you going faster? You haven't given us updates. And I would say, we did come out with an update at the end of December. There was a press release we went through and some fairly, lengthy detail, all the different steps that we had taken to get our permit applications in place. And then our CEO did an interview at the end of last month, January, where he ran through some progress we've made on the pilot plan, as well as our broader business plan. So it's more of have a look at some of that material that's out there. It is actually out there. I think sometimes it gets buried, but it is out there, and we'll continue to provide updates. And while the updates might not be a shovel in the ground, it's steps that you can't put a shovel in the ground without, for example, having water. And guess what? There's not a whole lot of water in Nevada, and there's a lot of development happening. So having the water allocations tied up is no small feat. That's one of those moments, Ronald, like you surfaced, what does the market want to see? And what am I most proud of, and what's the most difficult to achieve? So I think some of the updates that you see are they're not shovels in the ground, but they're critical path milestones we have to achieve before it's even possible to submit the application to get shovels in the ground. So if I had anything to say, yeah, please have a look at what's out there. We're always happy to answer questions on the process and why what we're saying is important, and reach out. Like, we're happy to do that. And then also just I hope that what we've shared in the past builds confidence that we have built partnerships in the communities with the state, with the city, so that we are seen as a good citizen, and that public goodwill and trust and our ESG focus is going to allow us to scale quickly and be incredibly successful while accomplishing social good.
A question that I have is just a simple one. Why Fernley?
Yeah, it's a great question. And when we think about locating the pilot plant, some of the key criteria we look at are what is the logistics infrastructure. There's a interstate highway nearby. There's a railroad or a rail line that literally is adjacent to our site, and there's future plans for that. There's proximity to potential, industry business partnerships, whether it's auto manufacturers or mining companies, or other OEMs or aggregators of waste. It's really great from that. The regulatory framework could not be better. Fernley has been incredibly welcoming of companies that propose new jobs and responsible companies. It's an opportunity zone. And we also look at education infrastructure. So UNR, for future talent pipeline development, UNR has a great engineering program. The local community colleges have deep partnerships with some of the industries that are being hit by COVID, so where workers can be retrained and take advantage of the new manufacturing jobs from clean energy economy and companies like ourselves. So it really is, again, the logistics infrastructure, the regulatory climate, the education setting, and the ability to attract talent, which Fernley's part of a larger metropolitan area where there is local talent already and where specialized roles we may need to hire would be attracted to coming to an area like Fernley and the Reno region.
So Menka, I know you talked about water. Then I guess more than likely I might be able to find the answer if I go back and look up the press release. But I gotta ask then, did you get it? Did you get the water? Yes,
we got the water. Exactly. Thank you for clapping. This again, it goes back to relationships and our team. Our team is rooted and local. Scott Jokelver joined, our Chief Resource Officer, late last fall, and has deep relationships. Has been a Bedstone part of the community. Those relationships helped us to get our water allocation. We estimate we'll need around 78 acre feet to run our pilot plant, and we have more than that, considerably more than that tied up.
Nice.
And it's also a good question because the Fernley, we're in what's called basin. Basically, Nevada has taken its different water basins and divided them up into a number of acre feet of supply available, and then that gets allocated. And you can't get any more because there's no more water, right? So each basin has its number of allocated water acre feet allocatable. And actually our basin 76 is over allocated. That means there's more that's been allocated than there is estimated to be supply. So it was even more tricky to get the allocations, but we got them and we're off to the races.
And once you get them, you really don't need any more because of what you described earlier. You just keep on cleaning it, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I can't say how grateful I am that we got that taken care of.
Yeah, no, it's sometimes you step back and you realize, well, it is a process all run by water. It's probably one of the most important inputs. So
in the desert.
Yeah, you just don't realize it, and you're always looking for the shovel on the ground. Thanks for clearing that up, Menka. That's very helpful.
When people say, "Oh, it's a clean process," like what does that mean, right? On layman terms, I mean, like one of the big factors is you're not requiring so much water every year to run your recycling process, right? You reuse the same amount of water, so it doesn't take up those resources over the course of like 5 to 10 years. And that not only makes processes more profitable, it's also environmentally friendly because you are not absorbing all these resources in order to run your process. So that's great to hear. And that's something, maybe some viewers who don't have that level of depth into the research in this company, that's a great thing to really appreciate, not just from a bottom line perspective, but a bottom double line perspective when it comes to the environmental impact of what we're doing.
Well, and not only that, but the thing that I took away from it was if you were discharging water, you probably could not operate a facility in that location because you would not be able to secure adequate supply. So yeah, it seems as if that's kind of a prerequisite in order for you guys to accomplish what you're trying to do.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. The other key points on what does it mean to be green, to your question, Ronald, I think the air emissions is an untold story across recycling. Like not all battery recycling processes are equal in terms of being green. And I'm pretty proud that when I say green for our process, it means we will be emitting near zero particulate matter into the air or greenhouse gas emissions. And that's because we don't use high heat processes.
Exactly. And I just want to draw this analogy, like when I was researching into Tesla, I think one of the big FUD pieces was, oh, it's an electric car, but you know how electricity is generated? It's a terrible process to generate electricity. It's really bad for the environment. That's why the emphasis on solar generation, which is a clean process, which then powers your electric car, net closes all of that FUD, right? So when it comes to recycling, it's like, okay, well, we can recycle these batteries, but if you burn the batteries and it creates all this toxicity, and it actually, the local inhabitants of Fernley breathe that, that's terrible, right?
You're pumping out, hundreds of millions of gallons of sulfuric acid into, barrels and burying them out in the desert. That's not helpful to anyone either. So I think that there's a lot of things stacked one on top of the other that, you couldn't accomplish them unless you had all of those pieces in place, which is what attracted us and, why we were even interested in the first place.
I love that you're so focused on the ESG component of our business. In addition to, obviously, our throughput makes us very profitable. And then, if you just think about the time frame, hours for a battery to come in and go out as battery grade metals compared to years for mining new resources, or even weeks or months if you have to divvy up the processes, like get to black mass and then send it somewhere to refine it to battery metals and then send it to somewhere else. We do that all under one roof. So to be profitable like that, but to also focus on environmental, social goals is the perfect marriage. And I love that you pick up on that because it's a true differentiator for us.
No, Menka, and for us, when we came into this industry to invest, we know it's a true differentiator. Other old technologies, if you use high heat, you lose yield, right? Mm-hmm. When you burn, you lose yield. One, it's not environmental friendly, and two, it's fundamentally not cost effective. If in the recycling industry, in order to make money, you have to be the most environmentally friendly as possible. If you emit particles into the air, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just seeing dollars getting burned because those particles should have stayed on the ground and be sold back to people who want them, right? And then when it comes to water discharging, if you're gonna just discharge water, all I see is more dollars being drained because those particles in the water should have just been processed and sold back. That's the whole point of recycling. If you're not green in recycling, you are just wasting money one way or another. And that's part of the reason why us three, when we saw American Battery, we were so enticed by it because anything you do to push the green envelope is both financially sound for the company and for an environment. They just tie hand in hand.
Well, and then there was the realities of high heat processes where I looked at, okay, well, much like Elon Musk has said, it's very easy to create a prototype. It's very hard to reach scale. And so when I looked at some processes that were high heat, I thought to myself, okay, well, if you want to scale this process to 10 times the throughput, presumably maybe not exactly 10 times, but you would need many orders of magnitude more smelting systems, which in turn produces that many orders of magnitude more emissions. And so when you look at the amount of feedstock that will need to be recycled, I would shudder to think about how many furnaces would need to exist and be running 24/7 in order to melt and burn and, reclaim a lesser amount, but reclaim some battery metals. So, yeah, I think what you guys are doing is really fascinating. I'm excited to see more soon, hopefully.
Me too. I can't wait to show you more soon. Believe me.
When it comes to writing those permits, who's writing them? Is it you? Is it Ryan? Is it August? Is it, depending on which permit, a different person? Both of you tag team on a certain permit? Like who's a permit person over here?
It's a great question, and my answer is yes. To all of the above.
It's not easy, is it?
Yeah, I think if Ryan had his way, we would do all of it internally. So we had to share as little information as possible for good reason. And he and August would do the best job possible on the planet of anyone I know, because they're incredibly brilliant. But the fact of the matter is we're also, running a business, and we have lots of work to be done. So yeah, we do have a consultant team, some incredibly highly qualified individuals, Miles Construction, Broadbent, and who are helping us technically, practically write the applications. So it's a little bit of, and yes, I may have written some of the language in our permit that went in last week as COO. And yes, Chuck Lever, who leads our construction, wrote a lot of it as well. So it's all hands on deck, but we are relying on consultants just to make sure that we can all accomplish all of our business milestones.
One thing also when it comes to the recent PR releases, when we saw a picture of what the plant looks like for the first time ever, right? And what people don't realize is that's not like a conceptual drawing. No. That's like the architectural blueprint. That means like,
yes.
Did you guys figure everything out? Like the machines, yes. What goes inside it, and because of that, you know how big the outside facility is. Is there a little bit of breadcrumbs that they know how to scale recycling to like big numbers?
Yes, this is, you can't submit a permit application with a drawing like that where you have to talk about building heights and building massing and square footage if you don't know what the equipment is, where it's going to go, where the different functions are going to occur. Yet you can't do that. So yes, we have figured this out. And the next level of permits will, the building permits, the site permits will show a whole lot more in detail. But this is what was required for this planning level permit.
I was speculating that on the internet for the longest time, but hearing it, confirmation COO right here. All right, we're good, fam. We're ready to go. All right. Thank you for that.
Yes. That's so funny you asked that. I guess this is where the architect in me comes into play. Like, what do you mean it's fake?
I saw a variety of feedback on that one. I mean, my feedback was that I saw a semi truck kind of peeking out in the back, and I'm like, you didn't make it a Tesla semi, like missed opportunity. This is a future, clean truck, man. Come on. Yeah, that was my only criticism when I saw it. I was excited.
Thank you so much. We will have, yes, this was our permit submittal. We're moving as fast as possible, but we will have renderings, which will have EVs and yes, the full.
Yeah, have some fun with it.
Yes.
Nice. All right. And I think what that signal, you don't have to comment on this. This is me openly speculating that, we've heard that this company has figured stuff out on the Benchscale. This is not theoretical. You actually know how to recycle very profitably and very ESG friendly. But maybe the problem is there's a difference between recycling in a lab and recycling, all these huge amounts at scale with a facility. And, how do you get the process from one part of the process to another part? What does a room temperature look like one process to another part? How does a black mass get from point A to point B, and what does it become and look like? There's so many small scaling questions, which is why it's hard for recyclers to be profitable. And just seeing that drawing has led to the belief that maybe not everything, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. But a lot of it has been, at least theoretically, you have a game plan for how that is, and with enough of a confidence to be able to submit it for something like permitting. So for all the people on the internet who says permitting isn't sexy, it's very exciting to me.
I love hearing that. Yes, we have that figured. You literally cannot apply for the permits if you don't have those parts figured out.
Cool.
End of story. Like, you won't get the permits. So if you have the technology and you're submitting for permits, you've figured it out. You have had to.
Based on what I've seen online, I think people expected like a Breaking Bad, you guys recycling in an RV out in the desert with no permits and just, forging ahead. But it's nice to at least peel back the onion layers here and understand that it is not as simple as, you guys showing your drawings and saying the rest are trade secrets, or you guys saying you don't put anything out in the environment. Don't ask any other questions. There's some nuance here. What we wanted mainly to find out is just how much of a nightmare is it to try to get something this first of kind through the process. And I think you helped us understand that today.
And I would say you helped us understand even more right? Like I think a lot of us walked in here thinking permits was just another obstacle to the construction of the plant, but you've helped us understand the fact that the permitting is a validation of the entire business process and all the thought and the plan that's put into place. That in itself is so foundational to how you guys set up, because whatever you put on paper is what you have to do. You can't just put something on paper to go through the process and then 2 months later decide to move the machine 20 feet left just because, oh yeah, you didn't think about this or you didn't think about that. The amount of thought, the amount of strategy put into just the placement of equipment, we didn't come in here at all thinking that was that important. But just hearing from you helps us understand, hey, when this is all said and done, a lot of thought has been put into a lot of strategy, and it's just pure execution from that point on.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. And I hope in going through the permitting process that we're going through, we are proving exactly what you all have mentioned, that the greenest process in this industry will be the most profitable. And I think it'll naturally drive the industry. My hope is it will naturally drive the industry to achieve higher environmental outcomes.
So thank you for taking the time to join us today. We really appreciate it. Really enjoyed really nerding out over the details. It was fun for us.
Thank you for being interested. I'm so grateful. Very few people like to have these type of conversations because it's not the most popular. And I love the fact that you're interested in it because it gets at the root of how much work has been done and the integrity of what we're doing and why we're so excited.
That's why we started the podcast, was because we had all of these interests, and then we started to realize other people might have these interests as well, and they're just not being covered anywhere. So,
thank you.
Thank you for taking a chance on us.
Yeah,
Thank you, Menka. Thank you for your time today.
Of course.